Hey everyone, Blake LaGrange here from mastering.com, and I've teamed up with Access Analog to give you this brief tutorial on how to use this black box HG2. This thing is fantastic. It's basically a bunch of tubes in a big box adding saturation and perceived loudness to your mix. So I would call it sort of the ultimate mix bus. So for some reference, we have a drum track here that we're going to listen to. So there's our drum track, totally dry. It is going through the signal here, obviously, but it's not, nothing's being processed. We don't have anything in or out right now. So just briefly, we're going to walk through each one of these knobs and what they do. So think of this not necessarily as a compressor or an EQ, but really a harmonic, saturation, distortion. So it kind of does a bunch of different things. Natural compression, and it EQs a little bit as well, adding some character, but it basically is some tubes here that will interact with each other, and you can add saturation and play with that. And so let's just look at all of this here. First thing we want to look at is the in and out. This engages the unit so that we have this in. And then the next thing we want to look at is truly, I would point out every single knob here, but I think the best way to do that is how you would go about using this thing in terms of your processing. So what I would recommend doing is starting from the this is sort of the natural default position. This is at 12 o'clock, and this is, say, at around 10 o'clock or so. Just resetting everything to how it comes. Let's start off there. This, by the way, will select the meter, whether it's VU, peak, or center, so you can get a different idea for which one you're looking at here. But this is sort of the default setting. What I recommend you do is bring up the pentode and keep the triode the same, and then bring down the triode. These are two different types of tubes, and just kind of play around with them. Because what's happening is the signal is going through this box, it's hitting this tube, and then it's also hitting this tube. And you want to interact with these two things. So watch, I'll just show you what this pentode does. It'll just saturate it quite a bit. So getting some nice saturation, but you want to basically turn down this tube now to gain match it. And we can check that here by hitting bypass. Pretty close. Let's do an extreme version of this. There's some saturation now. Bypass. So what I've done is I've added a lot of perceived volume. It's compressing in a very natural harmonic way, adding just a lot of harmonic distortion. So there's one way to do that. You can also think of this as like a guitar amplifier. A lot of people have the pre and post. Think of it that way. You have the pre tubes and the post tubes. It's sort of like that. So let's go back to this. You can also do it in the inverse, where you can turn down the pentode and up the triode. So very subtle. Now, once you have this dialed, and let's go back to something a little bit more realistic. I'm going to turn this up. Love that sound. Let's volume match it. Let's say you like that. You like the sound of that. You're getting a lot of perceived volume. Great. Now you can incorporate another saturation knob here, which inserts saturation into this signal. So it gives more perceived loudness and more saturation in parallel. You can really hear it there with the low end. So cool. So you can select these 3 different EQs for the saturation here. You can do flat, low, or high. So we can say if we just wanted to saturate the low end parallel, we could do that. Or the high end. This is more just flat. An original signal. And then processed. A couple other things here is we have the alt tube, which switches to a more aggressive tube, literally. I mean, within the analog matrix, it will go into this box and you will switch to another tube, which is a little bit more aggressive. It's very subtle, though. Some other things here are we also have the air button right here, which adds a little bit more like a high-end boost a little bit. Without. With. And then we also have the output, like I said before. And then we also have trim. So this is kind of a left-right, very subtle trim with volume. It's very, very subtle. Bypass, then in. So this is fantastic. With this black box, you can do drums, you can do mix bus, and really get that perceived loudness, the RMS meters going up, the LUFS meters going up, without it having to truly peak. And so this is just a fantastic way to add harmonic distortion and saturation to your mix so that everything just kind of pops out. It's kind of like it's quite literally magic in many respects. So now you can access this with Access Analog.